All right. So I think we'll go ahead and get started. I want to welcome everyone tonight to Simple Strategies for Sustainability. Happy Earth Day. I can't think of a better way to spend Earth Day than discussing ways we can help to ensure the health of our planet. I will be offering tips tonight that can help move us towards a more sustainable lifestyle and the context for those tips so that you can understand better why they matter. And my hope is that by the end of the evening, you will have one or two strategies that you feel you can use that will help you live in a more sustainable way, and that will help you feel like you're having a positive impact on the health of the planet. So I'm going to start by talking about just what sustainability is and why it matters, why it's important. So the Earth's climate is changing. What does this mean? Well, it means that global temperatures are rising. It also means that snow and rainfall patterns are shifting. And we kind of got a taste of that this week with the snow. We're having more extreme climate events. There are heavy rainstorms and record high temperatures, record low temperatures, stronger hurricanes. Many of these observed changes are linked to the rising levels of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases in our atmosphere. And this is caused by human activity, according to the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. Climate change affects our health. It affects our economy, and it can even affect our security. So how does climate change affect our health? Well, according to the Center for Disease Control, climate change is projected to harm human health by increasing ground level ozone or particulate matter air pollution, which can contribute to a whole host of problems, health problems. These include diminished lung function, increased hospital admissions and emergency room visits for asthma, and increases in premature death. In addition, climate change can lead to higher pollen concentrations and a longer pollen season, and this can cause health problems with allergens and allergies. Increased wildfires that are the result of climate change will impact air quality. Greater temperature extremes also threaten our health. Flash floods, extreme weather events have led to increased deaths from these events. And finally, there is greater food insecurity and an increase in mental health issues as a result of climate change. It can also impact our economy. Though in 2020, the World Economic Forum ranked climate change as the biggest risk to the economy and society. A United States government report in November of 2018 raised the possibility of the US gross domestic product, the GDP, decreasing 10% as a result of the warming climate. In addition, it can have an impact on our security. The US defense and intelligence leaders agree that climate change is a threat to security, and it's not a future threat, it's a threat today. Climate change is affecting global stability, military readiness, humanitarian crises, and the risk of war. Communities around the world are experiencing negative impacts due to extreme weather events, food and water shortages, and sea level rise. The Defense Department's 2014 quadrennial defense review describes the effects of climate change as, quote, threat multipliers that will aggravate stressors abroad, such as poverty, environmental degradation, political instability, and social tensions, conditions that can enable terrorist activity and other forms of violence. So that's why sustainability matters. Yet the idea of addressing climate change on the level of the individual, you and me, as opposed to at the level of the government or corporations, can feel inconsequential. How can one person or a family actually make a difference? The fact of the matter is that individuals can make a difference. And if enough individuals adopt sustainable habits, the ripple effect can be significant. The actions that individuals can also encourage larger organizations to make more impactful changes. For example, shifts away from eating red meat and beef have helped to energize the hunt to find ways to make livestock have less of an impact on the climate. Tonight, I'll be focusing on 5 different areas where we can all have an impact. The first is food production, and this includes producing and growing food, processing food, and transporting food. The second is food waste, and by this I'm talking about the food that we waste every day at home that we end up throwing out because it's gone bad or because we're not eating it. I'm also going to cover transportation, which is the largest category of greenhouse gas producers in general. So it is an area where we can have an impact. I want to talk a little bit about plastics and why, because they use a lot of resources to produce, and for all intents and purposes, they really never go away. It takes a long time for plastic to degrade. And then lastly, I want to talk about electricity. The ways that we can reduce our electric usage and the ways that we can use a more sustainable source of electricity. I will be discussing these in the context of the 3 R's. They reduce, reuse, and recycle. And reducing the amount of resources that we use and the amount of waste that we produce, reusing the resources that we do have, and recycling when we can. However, recycling alone isn't enough, and a vast majority of the items that we try to recycle are not actually recycled. So therefore, using the recycling bin as a way to ease our conscience and justify using things such as bottled water probably is not the best strategy to use. And I'll get into that when we talk about plastics. So food. Food is central to our lives. Not only do we need it to live, but it's the cornerstone of our culture. We bring family and friends together over a meal. We have special occasions centered around a meal, and we use it just to socialize and have fun. Yet food is also one of the biggest factors that can contribute to the health of our planet. In 2019, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is known as IPCC, which is a UN body that assesses climate change, found that food production is responsible for 37% of all carbon emissions. 37% is pretty significant. While food production is one of the biggest factors contributing to climate change is one of the biggest threats to food production. Just think about that. As the weather patterns change and the climate warms, it really threatens our food security. So what can we do as individuals to address this? Let's start by considering that the conventional livestock industry accounts for nearly 4/5 of agricultural emissions. Cows require immensely more feed, water, and land than growing plants. Beef is 100 times more emission intensive than legumes. In addition, poultry consumption has skyrocketed in recent years because people are moving away from beef. Chickens require feed, typically soy, which is grown in South America, where there once were forests and savannas. Thus, important forests are being destroyed to feed chickens that we eat. In addition, farmed chickens and other poultry make up 70% of the birds on Earth by weight. That's how much poultry is being farmed currently. Finally, overfishing is also a problem. Part of this is because when you fish, you disrupt the food chain, and you're putting certain species at risk of becoming underpopulated and other species at becoming risk of being overpopulated. And so it's destroying biodiversity and causing the entire ecosystem to suffer. So this is the graph from a study that was published in the journal Ecology, and it just compares how much CO2 is emitted per serving of these different types of food. And you can see that beef produces a lot more greenhouse gases than even cheese or poultry or pork. But if you look down at the far right, you can see that the rice, legumes, carrots are a minuscule fraction of emissions compared to beef. The impact of meat consumption on the environment is so significant that the UN IPCC report from 2019 said that plant-based diets are one of the most major opportunities for mitigating and adapting to climate change. So let's get into some of the tips that I promised. Sustainable eating involves reducing the consumption of animal products, focusing on buying local, and paying attention to how foods are packaged, looking for the least amount of packaging possible. So let's start with the reducing the consumption of animal products. Start small. One day a week, meatless Mondays. Just take it day by day, trying to reduce the amount of meat that you're eating. Any amount of reduction is going to benefit the planet. You can gradually increase that as you learn new ways of eating. We were all probably raised on the idea that a square meal includes meat, potatoes, and vegetables. But we now know that that's not the healthiest diet for our bodies, and it's not the healthiest diet for the planet. And incorporating more vegetables and less meat and potatoes makes for a better, healthier diet. As you're reducing your meat, you look for plant-based proteins to replace it. They're using tofu, legumes, and beans to replace meat will have a much healthier impact on the planet, and it will be healthier for you. And they're great sources of protein. So tofu works great in stir fries. You can crisp it in the oven if you want that texture, and if the texture of tofu is off-putting, and marinate it in soy sauce or whatever you marinate it in, it will absorb those flavors. Tacos using black beans are delicious, and you can even make a bolognese sauce for pasta using lentils and walnuts, believe it or not, in place of the meat. In addition, there are ample supplies of plant-based meat alternatives on the market, and they're readily available at Kramer's, Whole Foods, Jewel. If you're looking for a more meat-like substitute to help you feel like you're eating meat, these are really great options. So a couple of the brands maybe you've heard of. Beyond Beef is a brand that makes excellent hamburger patties that are ready for the grill. They make brats, they make breakfast sausages, and they're so satisfying that it's really hard to tell that they're not actually meat. Another company that makes decent sausages is Field Roast. I've tried their sage and apple sausage, and it's really quite good. And they also have plant-based hot dogs. Corn and Garden are companies that produce plant-based chicken and chicken nuggets. So there are a lot of great options on the market if you want to try some of these plant-based meat alternatives. In addition, there are really great dairy alternatives, and there are, nut-based milks and oat milk, which use emit fractions of the CO2 gases. There is vegan cheese and vegan butter and ice cream, and they're delicious. The cheese takes a little getting used to, and that may not be your first stop if you're trying to try some new products. but Miyokos is a company that makes vegan butter that you can use in baking, and you can put it on toast, and it's really quite good. Vegan milk is a pretty easy switch, and it's an important switch. That's because cow's milk produce 3 times the greenhouse gases of plant-based milk. Oat milk is the friendliest for the environment because it uses less water, but almond milk, rice milk, soy milk, cashew milk, they are all much better for the environment than dairy milk. Lastly, if you want to continue to eat fish and have that as your protein source, it's a great protein source. Just try to choose responsibly caught fish. This means the fish have been caught using practices that won't deplete their population. And oftentimes it means it's farmed fish. And if you're not sure whether the fish that you're buying is responsibly caught, you can ask the person behind the counter at your fish store, whether it's at Whole Foods or at another grocery. And if they don't know, which they may not, there's a organization called Seafood Watch, and you can go on their website it's put out by Monterey Bay Aquarium, and they will help you identify different sustainable options. Importantly to note, the IPCC reported that if we incorporate more plants into our diet, we can reduce the equivalent of up to 8 gigatons of carbon dioxide per year. So just by switching to a plant-based diet, we can really have an impact on the carbon emissions that are causing climate change. Another tip when talking about food is where the food comes from. And buying locally when possible, will help reduce carbon emissions associated with transporting the food. So what does this mean? This means that maybe start by shopping at the farmer's market this summer, looking for produce that's grown locally, that hasn't had to be transported over thousands of miles to get to the market. The more local, the better. Consider growing some food in your own backyard. You could start with cucumbers or tomatoes, something small that will be successful. But by reducing the amount of lawn mowing and chemical use for your lawn and growing your own food, you're going to contribute to positively to the emission of greenhouse gases. And while you're paying attention to where your food is produced, you can also pay attention to the brands that you support and seek out food producers that are environmentally responsible. So you want to shop mindfully and look for brands that are making a concerted effort to operate in an environmentally sound way. And one place to start is by looking at the Sustainable Food Trade Association, and they maintain a list of businesses that practice environmentally sound practices. And so that website is the sustainablefoodtrade.org. And it's a good place to start. Once you start paying attention, you can develop your own list and choose companies that are practicing sustainable habits. And then lastly, when you're buying food, you want to look for food that is has less packaging and is less processed. Every step of the production process and the packaging process along the way contributes to greenhouse gas production. So the more that you can reduce the demand for products that have a lot of packaging or that are highly produced, the less will be produced and the lower the impact will be. So to start with, you want to try to use as much fresh produce as you can, as opposed to frozen or canned. If it's fresh, it's not going to be packaged in plastic, most likely, and it's not going to be processed. When you buy your fresh produce, consider not putting it in the plastic produce bags that they have at the grocery store. You can bring your own reusable mesh bag or just toss it in your cart and make sure you wash it when you get home. The more food is processed, the more impact it has on the environment. So you want to opt for foods that are less processed. Not only are they better for the environment, they're also healthier for you. So it's a win-win. And a lot of times they're less expensive too. And then finally, pay attention to how the foods are packaged. Look for packaging that is recyclable or compostable. And if you have a choice, choose no packaging, as I mentioned earlier. So we've talked a little bit about how food production can contribute to the greenhouse gases and to climate change. So if we waste food, then that means we're producing too much food and we're ending up throwing out some of it. So what you eat can have an impact on greenhouse gases, but what you don't eat is also an important contributor to climate change. The UN estimates that globally, 1/3 of food produced goes to waste. In the United States, it's even higher. It's estimated that 40% of the US food supply becomes food waste every year. Food waste is responsible for about 8% of global carbon emissions. And if that were a country, it would rank 3rd behind China and the United States for yearly greenhouse gas emissions. The majority of food waste in the United States comes after the point of sale, which means it's from restaurants, food service, and households. And 70% of it, so most of it, is from households, being we're the biggest contributors to food waste. Household food waste costs a family of 4 roughly $1,800 a year. So it's also expensive. Part of the reason why there's so much food waste is that we're eating on larger plates. We're shopping at bulk stores like Costco, where you get a deal on a whole lot of food. We have larger refrigerators, maybe 2. And all of this nudges us to buy more because we have a place to store it and we have a place to put it. So clearly, reducing the amount of food waste you produce is important. And sometimes you need to have some strategies to do that. So reduce your food waste. How are we going to do that? Let's go over some ideas. You can begin to reduce your food waste by carefully planning your meals each week. Make sure that you're buying just what you need and not buying too much extra. So one strategy for meal planning that I like to use is to plan my weekly menu on Saturdays or Sundays when I have the time to sit down with a cookbook or with the computer and figure out what I want. Create a table that outlines the meals that you're going to eat for the week of each meal. And then make a list based off of your meal plan. Making sure that you check your pantry, your fridge, your freezer to make sure that you know exactly what you need to purchase and what you already have. How many times have you gotten to the store and you can't remember, do you have the olives at home? You think you do, but you're not sure, so you go ahead and buy them, and sure enough, there they are in your fridge. You want to make sure that you're paying attention to what you have and what you need so that you're being more careful and not wasting. In addition, you want your meal plan to account for leftovers, because leftovers are the biggest source of wasted food. And so coming up with a plan or a way to take your leftovers and turn them into something more exciting so that your family will eat it. Think of it as a challenge. Take your mashed potatoes and turn them into potato pancakes or even gnocchi. If you grill vegetables, throw them on a pizza or create some soup with it. There are lots of ways to use your leftovers, and leftovers are super important in maintaining sustainability. And if you're careful, this is going to help you to avoid overbuying. Overbuying leads to a lot of food waste. Those huge packages of fresh produce at Costco might seem like a great deal, but if you're throwing out most of them or a lot of them, they really aren't. And we have such large refrigerators these days that it may seem okay to buy really large packages of food because we have a place to store them, but just start paying attention to how much you end up throwing out, and you might realize it's better to pass on some of those Costco deals. Another strategy is to use clear storage containers in your refrigerator. And that way you can see what you have in the refrigerator and things don't get lost in the shuffle or in the clutter of the fridge, and you're able to use them more. And then lastly, composting is another great way to reduce your waste. Composting, this is a picture of my composter in my backyard. And I'm actually doing a program this summer on composting. So if you are interested in it, I'm going to go into much greater detail about how to compost. But basically, it's taking your plant waste, turning it into nutrient-rich material for your garden, and then putting it back into the earth. And so it's creating a whole cycle of creating nutrients for your garden. And you can take the food that's gone bad in your fridge, if it's, moldy strawberries or raspberries or, green beans that you cooked that you aren't sure, you can take those and you can put them in your composter. And before you know it, you're going to have some really nutrient-rich materials for your garden. Transportation is another big category that contributes to the climate change. In 2018, it was estimated that it was about almost a third of all greenhouse gases come from transportation, primarily from burning fossil fuels in our cars, our trucks, ships and trains and planes. That's because over 90% of the fuel used for transportation is petroleum-based. And flights account for about 2.5% of the global carbon dioxide production at the moment. But the industry is expanding, and so it's expected to go up. And because planes fly high in the atmosphere, the greenhouse gases that they emit actually do more damage than the greenhouse gases that are emitted at a lower altitude. There are some new technologies that are in the pipeline, including biofuels and electric planes, but they're a huge investment and they need years of safety testing. So it's going to be a slow process. So that's not anything directly on the horizon. So until things become better, airlines are trying to increase efficiency and reduce waste. They're looking to carry more passengers and to use tailwinds and reducing distances through air traffic control to try to help with their impact on the environment. In addition, regulations are starting to put pressure on airlines to reduce their impact. But there is a rising demand for flights. There's a crazy statistic out there that I'm not sure I believe it completely, but that says that only about 6% of the world's population has ever flown. So that means there's a huge growth potential for the airline industry, which means this could be very impactful on the climate. So tip number 5 is to reduce emissions from travel. And let's go through what some of the ideas for that would be. So travel is unavoidable, and it's something that none of us really want to give up. So how can we reduce our impact on travel without stopping it altogether? So one way is when you're flying, try to avoid short flights. And that is because every time the plane takes off, a lot of their emissions are put out during takeoff. And that's where the biggest impact on the environment occurs. And so it's better to choose to drive if it's a drivable distance as opposed to taking, a short, hour-long 30-minute flight, something like that. Along the same vein, it's better to fly direct than doing 2 short flights and having a layover when possible. And that's because of the amount of fuel that's burned during takeoffs. And if you have 2 takeoffs to get to one destination, it's going to have more of an impact. Another tip is to fly coach when you're flying instead of first class. And that's because it's better to fit as many people on the airplane as possible. That'll make it more efficient. When you do fly, when you have to fly, when you want to fly, carbon offsetting is a good way to try to make up for the amount of carbon that is the amount of carbon emissions that go into your flight. So carbon offsetting doesn't get rid of the carbon dioxide that's produced when you fly. That still goes into the atmosphere. But what it does do is it tries to make up for your share of CO2 emissions that are released somewhere else instead. And that will help to, hopefully help to slow the overall global increase in carbon dioxide levels. So let me tell you a little bit about carbon offsetting. There are 2 main types of offset projects. The first is our forestry projects. And these are, you would donate money to either stop trees from being cut down or to plant new trees. And this is known as a biological sink. And what that means is that the trees will absorb the carbon dioxide and take it out of the atmosphere. So that's why it's really important. There are also carbon offset projects that are energy projects. And these are projects that would reduce the amount of fossil fuels by investing in energy efficient products or renewable technology. And so if you're interested in doing carbon offsetting the next time you fly, you can do it in a couple different ways. You can do it directly through your airline. I think United and American and I think Southwest and some of the more major carriers all have carbon offset projects and programs. You can also go to a website called TerraPass, and this will calculate how much carbon should be offset based upon your flight and allow you to donate money there for your carbon offset. So for example, for spring break, we flew out to Boston, and using TerraPass, my carbon offset would be about $5.53 for my flight, and I can donate that directly into renewable projects. You can also adopt more sustainable habits when it comes to driving. While it might seem counterintuitive, keeping your current car as long as you can will help reduce your carbon footprint. And that's because of the environmental impact of scrapping your old car and the impact of the production of your new one. So if you hold on to your car for an extra year or two, that benefits the planet. That's more sustainable. In addition, carpooling and avoiding driving with just one person in the car will be beneficial. And finally, bike or take public transit, or around here, it's Hinsdale's so walkable. Walk to the store to grab your groceries if you're not picking up too much. And if you are going to drive, which we all do, make sure that the tire pressure in your cars are properly inflated. According to one statistic, fuel efficiency is decreased 0.2% for each 1 PSI decrease in your tire pressure. So just make sure that you have the proper tire pressure, and that will help with the efficiency of your car. So plastics. Plastic is everywhere. It's everywhere, and it's nearly impossible to avoid. But avoiding plastic anywhere that you can is a really important part of the sustainability equation. And so that's because, let's start with plastic, what it's made from. Plastic is made from petroleum oil, which is not sustainable. Oil is a non-renewable fossil fuel that pollutes our air. And making plastic uses a lot of water. According to the water footprint calculator, it takes 22 gallons of water to make 1 pound of plastic. That means that it takes at least twice the amount of water to produce a single bottle, a plastic bottle, as the bottle will actually hold. Think about this. 1 million plastic water bottles are purchased every minute across the globe. That is a lot. Unfortunately, less than 10% of all plastic produced is actually recycled. I know you've probably seen that soft drink ad on TV that makes it seem good to drink their sodas from their plastic bottles and recycle their bottle when you're done. But the reality of it is that less than 10% of plastic produced is actually recycled. And it takes at least 450 years for a single plastic bottle to decompose. Every minute, a garbage truck's worth of plastic ends up in the ocean. And nearly 2 million single-use plastic bags, like what you get at the grocery store, are distributed worldwide every minute. So plastic's a problem. So with that in mind, sustainability really means avoiding plastics whenever you can. And if you do use plastics, make sure that you know the rules regarding recycling so that you can ensure that they are recycled. So let's talk with avoiding plastics. Single-use bags should be avoided whenever possible. And those are like the bags that you get at the grocery store. And that is because of the environmental impact of their production and the fact that they aren't reused and they aren't recycled. So when you're shopping, instead of using plastic bags, bring your own bag. And I'm sure many of you are. Any kind of bag will do. Canvas, it can be any bag. Just make sure that you're not taking new plastic bags. And in addition, try avoiding, as I mentioned earlier, using those plastic produce bags as well, and opt for some kind of reusable produce bag or no bag at all. With so many reusable bottles that are available on the market now, there really isn't a good reason to buy water in plastic bottles. So try to avoid using the plastic water bottles and opt for a reusable bottle, preferably one of the aluminum bottles that are easily found today. Opt for reusable straws instead of using plastic straws. It's estimated that 500 million plastic straws are used every day in America, which is enough to circle the earth twice. And then when it comes to food storage, look for plastic-free options, such as glass containers, reusable bags instead of Ziploc bags, like stasher bags. There's Joy, I think, is a company that makes reusable plastic. They're not plastic, they are plastic, but they're reusable, and you wash them in the dishwasher, and you can get them at Whole Foods. They're like Ziploc bags, but they're reusable. You can use beeswax wraps instead of plastic wrap, or you can buy silicone covers that will you can put on over bowls and plates to store your food in the refrigerator. There's also a company called Food Skins, which make reusable Ziploc bags, as well as these small like sandwich bags that are made out of paper that are either recyclable or compostable or both. And you can get those at Whole Foods as well, and the Container Store, I've seen them. So skip the sandwich bags and the plastic wrap. And then lastly, you want to look for plastic-free options when possible. So when you're ordering food out, tell them you don't want the cutlery and use your own knives and forks, avoid the plastic utensils. And there are a lot of products out there that you can buy that will avoid plastic altogether. There's a company called Blue, what's it? Sorry, I want to look it up so I get the right name. Blue Land, and they sell silicone canisters that you can pour powdered dish soap in, and then you get refillable powdered dish soap, and the packaging that it comes in is fully recyclable. If you use bar soap instead of liquid soap, you're avoiding the plastic container that the liquid soap comes in. You can buy shampoo bars instead of shampoo in a bottle. And again, it comes in cardboard packaging as opposed to plastic bottles. You can buy bamboo toothbrushes that are made out of bamboo and can be composted instead of buying plastic toothbrushes. And the list goes on and on. There are a lot of options. I recommend looking at, there's a website called the Package Free Shop, which sells a lot of items that have very little to no packaging and that are all eco-friendly. There's, as I mentioned, there's a company called Blue Land that sells a lot of different products that can be, the packaging can be recycled or composted. And then Earth Hero is another store online that has a zero waste store as well. So I recommend checking out those products and paying attention to the plastic packaging that are come with the items that you're purchasing. So then the other part of plastic is the recycling part. And it's important to know the recycling rules. So I contacted Republic Services, which is the refuse company in Hinsdale, to get some information about their recycling rules. And they directed me to their website that contained these two handouts that I have on this slide. Let me go through a couple of facts about recycling. Glass and metals, including aluminum, can be very effectively recycled, and they can be recycled indefinitely. That means that you can, the same glass can be, and the same aluminum cans can be recycled and recycled and recycled and recycled for an endless number of times. And the products that are made from the recycled materials are no lower in quality than the originals. Aluminum cans have consistently shown the highest value among recycled commodities and remain in very high demand. The average piece of virgin paper can be recycled now. However, plastic can only be recycled once or twice at most into new products. And oftentimes this is going to be something that doesn't have to carry food or that doesn't meet stringent strength requirements, such as lightweight household items. And that's because the polymers in plastic break down through the recycling process. And so the plastics, as they're recycled, lose quality. So that's why a lot of the plastics are being recycled into that plastic wood and plastic decking and things like that. It's being mixed into asphalt for more durable road pavement materials. So it's important to know the rules and to know what does get recycled and what doesn't. That's one reason why avoiding plastic is important. So let's talk a little bit about the rules. So to start with, you only want to recycle items that are permitted. So in Hinsdale with Republic, in terms of plastics, that's going to be any plastic that's marked with a number 1 or a number 2. So when you look at your plastics, even though it has a recycled symbol on it, if it has anything besides a number 1 or a number 2, you can't recycle it in Hinsdale. You can't put it in the bin. So number one and number two, the number one is, I'm pulling it up here, it's PET, and it's the most common type of plastic for those single-use bottles, so bottled water and sodas and things like that. So those are recyclable. But you do want to make sure you take the lid off and you throw the lid in the trash, because the lids will clog up the system and they'll create problems at the recycling plant. You also want to make sure that the bottles are rinsed out and that they are completely dry when you put them in your recycling bin. The number two plastic is typically the plastic, it's HDPE plastic, and that's typically what's found in milk jugs, juice bottles, detergents bottles. Just check your plastics and make sure that it has a number two in the recycling label. But those can go in too. But just like the number one, they have to be rinsed and then they have to be fully dry before you put it in the bin and throw any small lids or pieces away. So just because there's a recyclable label on a plastic item doesn't mean it's recyclable. So with Republic can recycle it. So just make sure you're putting those number twos and the number ones in. And then they do have this big handout here about whether takeout containers are recyclable. And they actually sent out a notice in September that said to really pay attention, because when you put dirty plastics and non-recyclable plastics in your bin, it causes a lot of problems at the plant, and it can cause an entire truckload of recyclables to get tossed into the landfill if it's not done properly. So start by looking for the recycling symbol. If it's a plastic container, make sure it's labeled number one or number two. If it's cardboard, drink carriers and paper sleeves are recyclable. Aluminum cans, make sure that those are rinsed and that those are clean. They're one of the best recyclable items around, but they have to be empty, clean, and dry. But not all takeout items are recyclable. So a cardboard pizza box, for example, is not. If it's been soiled with food, it is not recyclable. If the lid of the pizza box is not soiled, you can detach that and recycle the lid, but the bottom where the grease and the cheese and stuff and the food has touched it, that needs to be tossed. That cannot be recycled. Paper napkins, paper towels, and plant-based cutlery are suitable for composting, but they should never be tossed in with the recyclables. Foam containers, plastic utensils, condiment packets, and plastic bags cannot go in your recycling bin. So just skip them if you can. You want to make sure that all recyclables are free of food and liquid. And they say one dirty item can contaminate an entire truckload. And finally, don't put your recyclables in a bag. Just throw them right in that blue bin and roll it out to the curb. That's how they need it. So clean and dry, and don't bag. All right, moving on to electricity. Electricity is the second largest share of greenhouse gases. And so it's an area where we can have an impact. So to reduce electricity, we can either reduce what we're using, or we can look for sources of electricity that are more green. So to reduce consumption, there are a couple of ways that we can do that. We can start with the heating and the cooling in our houses, because that's where we use the most electricity. So certain things you can do is to reduce our heating and cooling impact by improving our insulation, using ceiling fans, and keeping thermostats a little lower in the winter and a little higher in the summer when we're not home. And that's going to help reduce the amount of energy we're using. Insulation alone can reduce energy use by 16%, and ceiling fans can reduce air conditioning by 15%. In addition, using smart thermostats that are programmable can be helpful at reducing our electrical usage. Changing the air filters in our furnace every 3 months will improve airflow and reduce our electrical use. And then lowering our blinds during the day when we're not home will help keep the temperature of our house more regulated. We can also replace incandescent light bulbs with LED light bulbs, and they use 75% less electricity. And then there's some other common sense strategy. When you're running laundry or the dishwasher, run full loads so that you're getting the most bang for your buck. Wash your clothes on cold, and that will reduce the water heater use, and especially if it's electric. And then turn off any devices that you're not using, especially electronics. Your TV, your computers, your stereo, they're called energy vampires because they suck energy when they're not in use. And so just make sure that they're turned off when you're not using them. And then another thing that you can do with ComEd is that you can choose green energy as your energy provider. And to do that, you go to this site here, it's Plug-in Illinois, and you can search your energy provider. ComEd will list off all of the different companies that you can choose to provide your energy. And there are many on the list that use green energy, renewable energy. For example, if you choose Green Mountain, you have a choice of whether you want wind or solar. The same with Clean Choice Energy. So to make the switch, you visit www.pluginillinois.org, and you can choose your supplier that way. You can see how they rank in terms of complaints, and you enter your name, your address, your email, your phone, and then your ComEd account number, and can sign up directly through this site, and they will let ComEd know. And just by switching to a green energy source, you can cut your carbon footprint by 15%. So you may want to check out this website and see what it looks like. I think a lot of companies are moving in this direction, and I think it's a great direction to move in. So last screen, my last additional tips for tonight. We live in a consumer-oriented society. If something breaks, we toss it and we replace it with the latest and greatest. That's just how our society works. However, reducing how much we purchase and how much we toss in the landfill is really an important thing to consider when we're thinking about sustainability. Try to hold on to your computers, your TVs, your cell phones, and other electronics as long as possible. Think of new uses for old items to avoid sending them to the landfill. Support B corporations. And let me tell you, certified B corporations are businesses that have been shown to meet standards of verified social and environmental performance. And they're really working to shift the definition of success to be more inclusive and sustainable. Society's most challenging problems cannot always be solved by the government and by nonprofits alone. And so by supporting companies that are sustainable, you're putting your money where your mouth is. So to learn more about B corporations, you can go to bcorporation.net. And on that site, they have a directory of the companies that have been verified. And you can search by categories to see the different companies that have been verified in the food industry, for example, in the apparel industry. I did a quick search of the apparel industry, and it includes things like Tom's Shoes, Athleta, Eileen Fisher, and Patagonia. So there's it's really important to try to support those B corporations because they are trying to make a difference in terms of sustainability. And then my last tip is to avoid fast fashion. And what fast fashion is, if you don't know, is it's cheap, trendy clothes that you can buy them pretty quickly, and they're fashionable for a short time, and then because you haven't spent a lot of money on them, you can toss them when they've gone out of style or when they're no longer popular. Fast fashion plays into the idea that outfit repeating is a faux pas, and that if you want to stay relevant, you just have to keep buying the latest and greatest looks. The problem with fast fashion is that it is made up of some of the world's largest polluters who are not paying attention to how they treat the planet. So I'm not going to list off a bunch of different fast fashion companies, but you know it when you see it, and you can do some research on the internet if you want to dig into it more. But trying to resist the urge of buying fast fashion and buying clothes from companies that have been more thoughtful about how they're using their resources would be a great way to be more sustainable. So that is the end of my prepared remarks. I was wondering if anybody had any questions, or if there's anything that I could go over. I do see some items in the chat. What is the best way to clean fresh produce? I actually just wash it with soap and water, believe it or not. And that seems to be just fine. Why does a small amount of food contaminate an entire truckload of recyclables? That is because if something is soiled, it will damage the paper, it will damage the cardboard, it will damage the things that are already in the truckload, and then they can't use them. And if the entire truckload gets damaged by unclean products, then it has to get dumped. It can't be recycled. The things that can be recycled have to be clean, and they have to be dry. And if you do it that way, then the truckload will not be thrown out. And I agree, the pizza industry should make some sort of change so the entire pizza box is recyclable. The box is recyclable. It's once it becomes soiled that it is not. So if they could put some kind of liner in it that would prevent the box from getting the pizza grease on it, that would make a big difference. Good comments. Any other questions or comments? Has anybody had any tips or any strategies that they've used that I failed to mention tonight? Well, I don't see anything. So I would like to thank you all for coming. Just a quick note, this summer, we are going to be doing a program on the developments of plant-based meat substitutes. So pay attention for that. As I mentioned, I'm doing a program on composting as well. So hopefully you will continue the conversation and move towards more sustainability. And I look forward to seeing you hopefully at some of the future presentations. Thanks to everyone, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a quick question. The composting. I am interested in composting. So when is that program?
The composting program, let me see. Gosh, it is on the website already. I believe I've scheduled it for June.
Okay.
It's in June. It's on the website. So go ahead and take a look at that. And I'm going to talk about kind of the different ways you can compost, and then what it involves, how you go about doing it.
Yeah, because I was actually even looking